Hey everybody, Tommy Sims here, bass player and I guess these days what they call a Grammy Award-winning songwriter, and you're watching The Case for Bass.
I'm Anthony Gethers.
And I'm Greg Weiss.
And we are the hosts of Case for Bass.
About you since you went and left me on my own. I'm so alone, so lonely, baby. And I wanna say that I know I was wrong, but I'm asking you to come back home.
I mentioned the song earlier that Tommy Sims had written, entitled Change the World. Tommy's going to sing that song for you right now.
I could reach the stars, I pour one down for you, shine it on my heart, so you could see the truth. Sunlight in your universe, and you would think my love was something good. Maybe if I could change the world.
I'll start by introducing him as 1997 Song of the Year songwriter, recorded by Eric Clapton, Change the World. We have Tommy Sims, and he's our special guest from Nashville.
That's right.
We want to thank him.
Honored to be with you.
For coming on. And the way this works is I pass the first question on to
you. Okay. First and foremost, let me actually give you a big welcome because I met you at the Kairos event in which you play guitar for Israel Houghton. So thank you for being so gracious to say yes to us.
Yes, man.
Please. Thank you.
Okay. So my question to you is this. Did you choose the bass or did the bass choose you?
Wow. Man, I've never been asked that before. I would have to say, I believe it chose me. Yeah, I would say it went that way.
Okay.
Because I just was always sort of cognizant of it, even before I knew I was, you know.
Okay.
And you guys being bass players, you know what that is.
Mm-hmm.
When for whatever reason, no matter what situation you're in, where you are, you just keep hearing the low notes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then your brain just starts to form its own low notes, even when there are none. So I think it chose me in that respect.
Okay.
I was drawn to it. Yeah.
So when you say you were drawn to it, what were your parents playing in your house growing up?
All the I would say, my family is a very big family, and when you get outside of my small nucleus of my two sisters and my younger brother, but then we had 300 cousins, and we all, our family.
We're like the Irish. We replicate.
Yeah, and so growing up Southside Chicago, you were one big moving family, really. You weren't just. Nobody was allowed to be isolated for too long, So there were just music people in this big bunch of folks that I was always in the middle of and around. There were just music people. So I couldn't help but love it and fall in love with it and get impacted by it because, there was any number of guitar players or would-be guitar players, singers galore, drummers, keyboardists, all through the family and all through the family circle. So it was just, I would say in that respect, I was born into it. The music that would have been playing would have been a complicated mix of gospel. And in those days, gospel would have been very different from what it is now.
Absolutely.
It was more of the quartets,
Yep.
and choirs,
Yep.
right, and preachers who happened to be singers also, right.
Yep.
That was sort of the gospel bag, and then I had the side of the family, my uncles, who were beautiful people and super musical people. They loved all the classic neighborhood records, the Temptations, the Undisputed Truth, Dennis Coffey Band, all that stuff, Motown, of course, Stax, of course, everything coming out of all those shops, was just regular fare in our world.
Did you have Stax records as well, like the Otis Reddings and the Joe Tex?
Oh yeah, no, all that stuff, Atlantic, Stax, Motown, and all the independents in between. Those were black, what I call black records, bona fide black records.
Yes.
Many of which were becoming pop records.
Sure.
But those were those were bedrocks. In the music in the house. Mom loved Aretha Franklin and she loved Stevie Wonder. Those were her two, and Gladys Knight. Those were her three North Stars. So I heard everything Gladys. I heard everything Stevie. I heard everything Aretha coming into the world. At the same time, I was hearing everything Shirley Caesar and everything, everything Joe Ligon, Mighty Clouds of Joy,
Mighty Clouds of Joy,
Swan Silvertones, Highway QCs. I was at the same time hearing all that stuff. So that's just what was normal, right? It wasn't until like a couple of my uncles had, and I look back on this now and I didn't know what a big deal it was, but a couple of my uncles were coming back from like Nam, and then their buddies also. I remember my two uncles, and then they had a buddy named Butch, and but they were all cats who made it back from Nam, and the records they brought back with them were fuzzier and louder, and more like just disjointed. There was some Last Poet stuff in there, and some but there was also like Dennis Coffey Band and Rare Earth, and Hendrix, all these loud tones,
But it was becoming more popular. It was an underlying vibe that was trying to get out.
It did eventually become popular, but at the time it was still very underground in a way. It was still it was not the mainstream, happy-go-lucky, what becomes of a broken hearted,
right?
Sure.
Good old finger snapping radio music. This was like kind of the hard stuff, like the stuff they played at night, at low volume,
Yeah.
And so, but those were like the intriguing records to me because I knew they were somewhat forbidden. Like I knew like they were trouble records, just by the way the attention they got from my uncles, and when they would get played and when they wouldn't get played,
I mean,
but
also
looking
back, it wasn't a 24/7 world, and
exactly.
there wasn't media on. The television shut off and ran a test channel, and there were only a few radio stations. In a way, it was like a rite of passage that people were experiencing this art form and this music with this newer technology called records. Then it was tapes, but people were serious about what they listened to.
Yeah, very much. Yeah.
And they're like, hear this and check out this message. And
you wanted to be sure, before you actually sprung for the actual hard copy, you know.
Well,
You wanted to be sure,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, let me ask you this, because I find that there's a lot of the old school gospel folks who, like, you were able to grow up with Mighty Clouds of Joy, Chili Caesar, and at the same time have
Albertina Walker and all those guys.
Yep, and then you have the R&B bands. I know there's a section of the population, especially in our community, that won't even mix R&B with
the other.
Right.
Secular versus
right.
non-secular. They
Yeah.
see it as being evil.
Yeah.
So it was kind of interesting to hear that you said that your uncles were accepting of the Stax records and Otis Reddings and everything else. At the same time, the Shirley Caesars, the Mighty Clouds of Joy, but they weren't accepting of the Hendrix.
Yeah. Well, no, they were.
Oh, they were.
They were the ones that brought the Hendrix records
Okay.
home, and Rare Earth and all these sort of kind of edgier records, right?
Okay, got it.
And so they had been given a mandate. Of course, they were older, you know, they were high schoolers and out of high school by that time. They had been, like I said, they'd been to Nam and back. You know, now we're pushing forward into like 71, 72, 73. And so, you know, they were all back from the war. But prior to going to the war, they probably would have heard the same mantra that we all heard in the family, which was, if you're in grandma and granddad's house, you're only going to listen to this particular type of music.
Okay.
And all other musics were forbidden, you know.
Wow.
But you know, of course, my uncles and aunts and stuff, they were all teenagers and kids. So it was like, well, at some point they were going to be exposed to this other music, right?
Sure.
And so they embraced it a lot. A lot of it that I heard, I would hear particularly through this pair of uncles of mine who were the rebels anyway. And so I would hear the Temps, and I would hear, you know, all the Shylights and Curtis Mayfield and all that stuff. Bill Withers. I hear all that music through them. And then I'd hear all this gospel stuff through at my grandparents' house. I love them both equally. That was the interesting thing. As a very small child, sort of still formulating my ideas about any music whatsoever, I was as drawn to the gospel stuff as I was to the pop and R&B stuff.
Wow.
You know, it was all very intriguing to me. The sounds of it were very visceral, I remember. There, so much so there was one particular gospel record that the family would jokingly put on because I would get completely freaked out just hearing the opening guitar chords. Like, I would freak out.
Wow.
And just like, don't play that song, man. That song is spooky, you know. And it was just this really tremoloed out guitar part, you know. But as a kid, something about it said, and the lyrics of the song were really dark in a way. It was a Christian group, gospel group. But the whole theme of the song was about this person who just made it just a few minutes too late to get in the pearly gates.
Wow.
That was the whole premise of this song. Was like, hey, you don't want to be that person, you know. Got there,
I missed the boat.
it just got there a few seconds late.
It's like missing that ferry to Martha's Vineyard. You're stuck.
And I mean, the
Been
music that they put that to was like the spookiest shit I'd ever heard ever. And I just was like, don't ever play that song, man. That song is weird. It's spooky. There's demons in it. I mean, it was like, you know. But now as an adult, I hear that song, and I'm equally transfixed by the sound of that guitar. And the way that guitar was able to make me feel that sense of doom, even not really even understanding lyrics, but I could feel the doom from the guitar. I could feel that sense of like foreboding and weirdness, and you know, from the sound of a guitar. And that's music.
That is music.
There's power in it.
Well, I want to comment on the guitar thing, because I remember having this debate with a buddy of mine, and he was talking about the influence of keyboards in Black church. I go, no, the keyboards didn't come until later.
That's right.
It was guitar.
It was guitars. And particularly floor guitar, what they call
Yep.
the floor guitars, which the steel.
Yep.
That was though. But you're right. You're exactly right.
was
Those
in
were
first.
the leading tones, and
Yep, I said because it was budgetary. A lot of the churches were performed. A lot of if you didn't have a brick and mortar church, you would literally have a place to go to. You would go
just somewhere out and
Yep, plug a guitar in. You don't have to plug it in. Back then, you didn't have plug. A lot of them didn't have amplifiers.
Right.
You would just play straight out, and that became your instrument of choice for church.
Yeah.
Keyboards came much later, much later with that. So speaking of that, you encountered low tones eventually. When did you acquire your first bass?
My first bass was 1976, I want to say.
Wow.
See if I got that straight. 1975, maybe, actually.
Okay.
And it was a sort of a hand-me-down deal from my older cousin who had graduated to a nice Fender bass. And I got his, I don't know if it was a Sears. I seem to remember it was a Sears brand.
Actually, I forgot they made instruments.
Yeah.
Sears made an instrument.
Yeah, it was like a Sears brand. Norma was on the headstock, the Norma. And I mean, the bass strings were like that far off. The further you got up the neck, the further off the neck the bass strings expanded, And so, you learned.
That's where the tone is. That's where the tone is.
I think a lot of
play
designers,
like an upright player.
a lot of quote unquote designers at that particular time modeled their version of the electric bass, which probably cost like $75 after the upright bass because just your length from your first 5 frets were like up to here. Yeah. And then as you went further off, it just kept getting further and further away from the fretboard.
What kind of amp came with that bass?
So I didn't have an amp that came with it, but at the time we had access to some of the older guys' basement tools that were still in the family basement. One of which was an old Sears Silvertone amp.
Wow, the Silvertone
with the Silvertone head and the matching cabinet.
Yep.
And then we had that Vox, and to this day I can't remember what model it was, but it was the Vox amp model that has the speaker on rollers on this case of rollers, and then the separate head that you sit on top of the roller speaker.
Nice.
And then we had a bass. We eventually got an SVT cabinet down there.
Whoa!
There you go.
Yeah. But yeah, so we had access to I think we had a couple of old Fender amps.
Mm-hmm.
The crazy thing is that we had this stuff, and we as kids we regarded it all as kind of like hand-me-down, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like now it's vintage, right?
Well, vintage, it's museum quality.
Yeah, it's like the gear. But back then we always had the impression that we were inheriting, our
hand-me-downs
stuff that they didn't want to use anymore.
Well, the reason I always ask is that how the technology changed from the 60s to the 70s, and that everything was really guitar electronics based, and they didn't know how to find like low frequencies or the low notes.
Right.
Like you would today. And, a common theme had always been people were listening to high end that was coming out, that they were fascinated by the real trebly parts of playing a bass. Yeah. And we always like to hear, people's answers and responses from that, as opposed to today where you're hitting, frequencies as low as 1825 hertz on a 6-string. I mean, the only fish can hear it. You know what I mean? It's
I know, right? It's had quite a journey, the function of it, right?
And
the low end,
and a lot of people that started they heard it and they felt it, but you just couldn't literally produce it.
Yeah. Well, that's what the synth, that's what the keyboard gave us. The keyboard gave us that sort of that idea that the bass is not the end all of low end.
Oh yeah.
Right? The extension of it.
I find that a lot of bass players, especially R&B, there was a point in time in the 80s that a lot of bass players became bass synth players with the Moog.
Had to.
Yep. So that
was
became a way of surviving.
Yeah.
Now, is that something you're familiar with as well?
Absolutely. Yeah. Bands were just, it was almost like the difference between getting in a band as a bass player and not getting in the band. Is that you had to have some keyboard chops, you had to have at least enough keyboard chops to play bass lines and stuff like that.
Okay.
It just became because so many records at that time, were driven by, keyboard bass.
Well, it was the arrangements and the writing.
Yeah. I mean, literally the records,
Yep.
there's, I always use an example with students that I speak with. And I always tell them, hey, take one of your favorite bands if you have one, or just take a band from 1981, say Cameo, for instance, the band Cameo.
Sure, of course.
And take one of their album covers from, say, 1980, 1981. There's 3,700 people on the front cover, right? In that album cover. There's at least 13 to 15, 17 band members on the cover.
I just want to be what you want.
That's right. I just want to be, and Shake Your Pants. That whole era.
Yep.
But just fast forward 2 short years, 24 months.
There were another 3 people on the front covers.
And look at the front cover of that album.
Yeah.
There's 3 people representing the same band.
Yep.
This was indicative all the way through the music. So now you take that and you take out, okay, the drummer's gone. Okay, the electric bass is gone. Okay, now it's just all being driven by drum machines and synth bass.
Yep.
That's the common bottom end on a R&B record in 1983.
Yep.
There's really the bass player. Mostly you'd hear the bass player on the album cuts or the ballads.
Yes.
But if it was the up-tempo radio banger, it was generally the drum machine and a synth bass. So every bass player in a band from that point on had to have some facility on a keyboard bass to be in that band.
I mean, listen to the song like my.
If I can ask, is that due to the control of the sound on the low end? Because where the bass, you need a human being, you need a stringed instrument, you need an amplifier, and on the other hand, you had a keyboardist that was directly in with low frequencies.
Could be directly, yeah.
I'm going to tell you what they said. I'm going to tell you what they said. Buddy of mine works for MCA Records. He goes, it's all budgetary. It was literally reducing the band, like Kool and the Gang reduced their band, Cameo reduced their band. Bands that basically they couldn't go into the 80s. Slave didn't go into the 80s. The Barcades didn't go into the 80s. So the bass players who played.
And Earth, Wind, and Fire was so big that they were able to continue on as who they were. But you're right.
Bobby Brown and like, what's his name? Teddy Riley.
Yeah.
Everything goes.
I mean, 1983, 1982, really, for R&B bands, 1982 was like, okay, the synth bass got strong.
Yes.
In 1982 on your, like I said, your standard up tempo bangers, the ones which usually were the ones that came out as singles, as the song represented the album.
They were doubled.
Or they would do the Marcus Miller thing where they double it both synth and electric bass.
Yes.
But by 1983 and certainly by 1984, there were no more electric bass parts showing up on the average R&B record.
It was like a desert.
I'll tell you what that really had to do with. It was one guy. It was Stevie Wonder. Stevie Wonder inadvertently started that process and started that thought process and started that appetite for that kind of low end, because that mini Moog and that synth low end was a different animal than bass.
I'll even take
strings.
it to a new genre and the Doors.
Oh yeah, the Doors were doing but they
Yes,
were
but not an R&B, not an
they were
R&B.
doing not
Well,
an
I'm just
R&B.
saying.
But
I'm
yeah,
just
they were
saying.
doing the
But
Rhodes bass. Yeah, they were doing the
yeah, they were
keyboard
doing
Rhodes
the
bass
Rhodes
stuff. Yeah,
bass.
yeah,
Let me ask
yeah.
you this:
But they
what
had
songs did
all
you change that
started
in?
seeing Stevie Wonder play the
Yeah.
synth bass, and that gave all these, even the rock bands, it gave them the consciousness that, hey, we could play the bass from a keyboard standpoint, you
Yeah,
know. And then a lot of guys adopted that, that concept because it was a cool concept. It was innovative at the time, right?
yeah.
Well,
like a new sound.
I
What
think what amended to
guitar?
that was the Mutron. Was
Yeah,
the
yeah,
effect,
the
because
effect, yeah.
Stevie Wonder was one of the first 7 people to get one. Bootsy Collins got one. Jerry Garcia got one. There are a few other people. Oh, George Duke
Oh yeah,
got
yeah, yeah,
one, and he did the
yeah,
demo for the Mutron, and the Mutron was like the game changer.
yeah.
That was bending that low tone.
Gotcha.
Mhm.
What
And
song
Stevie
was it?
Wonder, I mean, forget
Yeah,
it.
what song was it that you found was a pivotal moment that really reflected that change from Stevie Wonder? I'm trying to what song that was it? Because if you think about Sir Duke was very much bass driven.
Oh yeah, no, that's electric bass.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
electric.
no.
That's
Living
electric bass
living
on
for the
Circuit.
city.
I'm gonna go way before that. I'm gonna go years before those records that we're all very familiar with, because that's what Stevie had introduced that sound on his very first solo album, Where I'm Coming From.
What's the song?
That's Too High,
Too high,
with
too
those
high.
super dope synth bass part. Yeah.
Yeah,
But the original song was a song called If You Really Love Me. You guys remember that one?
I remember that song. Yep.
And if you really love me. That was the
That
first time that people consciously heard a keyboard bass in such a major pop configuration. It was 1969, 1970.
Wow.
Boom, 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 boom,
That's
boom,
true.
boom,
Yeah.
boom. But he plays all this great bass stuff on this keyboard. Throughout most of my childhood, well, not most of my childhood, but most of those early Stevie years, I just loved him as a bass player. I didn't know he was playing a keyboard.
Oh my
I
God.
had no idea it was a keyboard. So when I first started learning bass, I started learning all of his lines on an electric bass neck, which made for a very weird style of bass playing early on in my playing. But it was, it wound up becoming sort of really a part of my style of playing from that point, because I didn't know I was mimicking a keyboard. I didn't know he's playing a keyboard. I just love the sound of it.
Well, in hindsight, it's a smarter bass, isn't it? You're playing a cleaner line when you're playing keyboard related parts on a bass.
Maybe so. I mean, there are some Jackos and some Rockos who, it doesn't get much cleaner than them.
You can't do rock Castillo on a keyboard bass.
Yeah. That would be tough. That would be tough.
Yeah,
the one Stevie tune that switched me was Contusion.
Oh yeah,
and then to find out that Michael Cimbello is playing a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, he co-wrote that one. Yeah, Yeah. No, he was beast mode. And Stevie always knew he always had a beast bass player in his band, like for decades. Nathan Watts is just like,
yes.
I mean, just like the dirtiest bass lines known to mankind. Man, just heavy, Yeah, man, heavy,
When did you find your style? Because obviously you mentioned earlier at some point you were a drummer, and then you eventually hit guitar, and then you landed on bass out of necessity, per se.
Yeah. The bass was actually the first thing, probably the first thing I ever touched. I can't remember if it was the drums or the bass. My cousin, we had a cousin in the large family. We had a set of cousins who had instruments in the basement of their house. One of which was a drum kit that, for whatever reason, whenever we visited with those cousins, it seems like all of us kids would make a beeline for the drum kit.
Mm.
You know, it's like the first thing we'd all go for, you know. And so we had a lot of drummers
Okay.
in the bunch. And my brother was one of those. And so, you know, once I saw that my brother was getting very serious about the drums and really getting into it, that's when I decided, you know, well, maybe I play, you know, a different instrument, you know, and started. I feel like bass and guitar, I was always fooling around with the both of those things as a kid,
Okay.
you know, bass. I remember going with a stepbrother to one of his bass guitar lessons and watching him, strangely enough, just watching his instructor. And in my mind, I'm thinking, at this point, I'd never held a bass before. But in my mind, I'm thinking, well, that's easy. You know, what he's telling my stepbrother to do, I'm thinking to myself, that's simple. You know,
Wow. Okay.
that's just, you put your hand here, and you put your hand here and here and here. And it was in my brain, I was doing it, but it was my stepbrother's bass lesson. So I wasn't. And at one point, because I had accompanied him to the lesson, I guess the teacher just felt, you know, obligated to let me try. And so at a certain point, he hands me the thing and says, well, you know, why don't you give it a try, you know? And I don't know if maybe he saw my intent at, you know, the interest in what he, you know, and my, you know, my stepbrother couldn't, I mean, he just, you know, he couldn't work it out to save his life.
Oh, wow.
And I just picked the thing up and just started playing it. Literally just started playing it. Just playing the line that he was trying to teach to my cousin. I just started playing the whole line. And it was just a simple line. It was the 4 notes in the bass line of the OJ's Love Train, you know.
Okay.
It's like, you know. Yeah. Right.
Was the record playing during the lesson?
Yeah, he had the record.
So that, you know, there was a conscious intent,
so that we could hear, you know, we could hear
the application.
Yeah. And, you know, it was a record that was, you know, by that time, a super well-known record. So the bass line was already in my head, you know, from, you know, hearing the song many, many, many times, you know.
Wow. Okay.
But I just remember I picked it up and I just started playing along with it, you know.
Wow.
And from that point on, you know, I think it sort of grabbed me in a way, you know, that, hey, here's something I can do, you know, because this, it just, the best way I can describe it, it just seemed easy to me.
Okay.
Now, that's a terrible thing to say. And
Not necessarily.
I wouldn't necessarily say it to a beginning bass player or a beginning instrumentalist. But for me, it just was like riding a bike. It was like getting on a bike, and that once you get past that first wobbly stage and realize, oh, I just need to stay calm, remain calm, and pedal and steer, right? And that's what it was. That's what it was with the bass. It just,
did you find it was the music you were
supernatural.
attracted to?
I was always attracted to music of every type. So
right, and
that,
so
that would have
the
always
bass
been the
became
case.
complementary as opposed to like a guitar where you actually have to execute a style in order to be a part of it. The bass is very complementary to any style of music.
I liked that it was somehow instant. Somehow it just felt like it was. I didn't have this kind of language to describe it then, but somehow I could sense that it was fundamental. It was foundational. It was like, without it there, the music seemed like it wouldn't sit right, or it wouldn't be right, or, you know, it wouldn't, without that note underneath, you know, carrying us through, you know. It felt like a real, like, important thing to do, you know, to play the bass notes.
Awesome.
You know, for the song, you know.
You mentioned your style earlier. So when did you realize when did you find your niche? When did you say, you know, this is something that I enjoy doing this style, and I kind of wanted to continue doing this for the rest of my life? or when you make
I
when
mean,
that decision to be a player?
it was early on. Style was never something that I, consciously landed on, I have to say, because I was always chasing different styles. I was always hungry for new styles. And, once I felt like I'd had a little bit of a handle on one, I would very, very quickly seek out another,
You're like me. The same
yeah,
thing.
But I guess it wasn't until probably maybe when I got to Nashville and got into and entered the sort of professional end of it, that I started to see what people gravitated towards, like in my playing. I started to see what seemed to move the needle, and what got me gigs, and what got me on sessions, which was the thing I really, in those early days, that was like my big sort of thing was, I wanted to be able to play sessions, and play, and so this was I landed in this town at kind of couldn't have been a more perfect time. It was seemed like a town that was very hungry for bass players options. There were lots of, I guess there were several bass players here, but
well, also bear in mind you went there early. Sorry to interrupt you, but you were there relatively early.
Well, I was here in the 80s, right? Mid 80s.
Yeah,
so early to now. But there were bass players that had been here since the 60s, and 70s, right? Okay. And had played on famous records, in that era. But by the time I got here in the 80s, I guess maybe there wasn't enough of a variety of style in the bass players. Maybe, I don't know. There was certainly.
Did you notice that there was a lot of diversity in the styles of music that Nashville, that people just thought it was country, but there was like more than that going on?
I was shockingly surprised at the amount of diverse styles of music being made here. Because I was probably one of those ones, being from the South Side of Chicago, who, sort of had an idea that it was mostly country music here, and I really was concerned, in the early, just with the prospect of coming here, I was just like, well, that might be cool for maybe a year or so, but there's no way I could have a whole career, from Nashville.
Wow.
And here I am, man. Now 40 years later, almost.
Let's talk about bass playing and songwriting.
Oh, please. Can I ask a question?
Go right ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. Since I am the newest Tommy Sims fan in the room, I want to know that you talk about how the bass moved into a guitar. Can you talk about what voicings, and that the expression of voicings in your songwriting? I don't want to go to your biggest song first, but there is so much going on that is being expressed simultaneously. How does that come about? That the parts, do they make themselves?
In the songwriting, for me, it's different for everybody. In the songwriting, for me, it usually kind of all happens in a little bit of a package, I guess. I get guitar parts at the same time that I'm getting melodies, and at the same time that I'm getting a possible lyric line. It's usually all happening as one thing, like somebody playing it for me, and then I'm just learning it. It often happens that way. It'll just be something that just starts playing in my brain, and I'm hearing literally what the guitar part is doing, what the bass line is doing, and sometimes those things are two very different things. And at the same time, I'm hearing what the lyric and the cadence of the melody, and I'm almost always without fail hearing what the drums are doing. So in a lot of ways, I'm usually writing in this sort of full record mode
That's
almost
what
all
I'm.
the time.
I think that's what I'm asking.
Yeah,
Because it
yeah.
not to
A
go
lot of times.
not to go backwards, but I've heard your most famous work, and then I heard you on a YouTube video performing it in the songwriter circle, and kind of spoke about this early on, but how interpretation from what's in your head coming out of your mouth into somebody else's ears becomes somebody else's art form. And not to push the buttons on Change the World, but the first time I reheard it, I'm going, wait, is that Tommy Sims playing bass? Because I know Nathan East plays a lot of bass parts, but I couldn't believe how many bass parts he had to play to come through your vision.
Interesting. That's interesting.
I hear.
I never thought about it from that perspective.
Welcome to my show. It's this is the case for bass, because the interpretation. Now I'm going to go forwards. Hearing what you did and the expressions that you could put out on a guitar, when it got translated through a producer, through a name artist, through a name bass player, there wasn't a simple line. There's 3 lines going on at once. I know it's on a 6 string. I know it's Nathan East, and I know it's infectious. And what I'm trying to, I guess, make the point is that you laid so much into that songwriting piece that it took that much to express it on a record.
Well, I don't know, maybe. And like I said, I've never really thought about it from that perspective, but that's I would say I would go to like the idea that made me as a kid dream about these moments where you could be in the studio helping to create a moment, in essence, is what you're doing, because it's something that's gonna live on forever in that in that particular form, right? And so Nathan is one of those genius, gifted, born for it, born to it, bass players.
Yeah.
That you hear on every single thing that he touches, that he lays a line on. That made me as a kid go, that's something that I would like to be able to do.
Exactly.
I wasn't
100%.
as interested in the stage stuff. I had no interest really in being on stage with anybody.
I can see that when you perform. Like I watch you perform. You seem to be much more comfortable behind the scenes.
Yeah, but I loved the idea that you could go into these rooms, and with these machines and these toys and these tools and just create something out of thin air. And guys like Nathan East do it at a level where,
fluid.
We're here talking about it, right? And I would have to say that he gets the pulse of things.
Nathan put in this 10,000 hours.
Well,
yeah, no, he gets
Barry
the
White
pulse,
thought so,
and he'll put it right there for you. Just right there every single time. And I think that has as much to do with whether or not the thing's gonna get some wings and take off, right? And see the light of day. When you get cats like that contribute to it.
were you surprised how many artists redid different versions of your songs?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, no, I mean, the whole thing after that, the whole thing was a surprise. I mean, truth be known, I mean, from right from the very first moment, the whole thing was a surprise. And then, everything that happened after it was just like, wow, I can't believe this,
Well, let me ask you this. Now, this is non-bass related. Did you have a good publishing deal with that one, so that you have the gift that keeps on giving with that song? I hope so.
We were in our second publishing deal of my career, and it was okay. It wasn't a rape and rob you type of deal. It was, but it also wasn't like the best publishing deal that I'd ever made. Right. It was kind of like my first. It was really like my first sort of legitimate, you know, publishing situation with a big company.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, what I had was, you know, a fair deal for a beginner writer, like a guy that didn't have a lot of, you know, a lot of songwriting credits yet and a lot of songwriting successes yet.
Awesome.
You're
also blessed because most guys get raped in the very beginning.
Oh yeah, no, I had one of those deals, but
sure.
But thankfully I didn't. That song wasn't a part of that.
Okay, good for you.
Thankfully I was past that by then, and was in a deal that was okay. You know, it wasn't. I wound up, you know, making a much better publishing deal after that deal, but it was okay. They, you know, I got paid pretty good, you know.
Good for you.
Yeah.
Okay,
and still get paid. You know.
Now it's bass gawk time. How do you end up on a Taylor Swift record?
That I think that was maybe perhaps the story I'd gotten is that maybe that was through Taylor, who
there's a lot of players on the record.
Was a very, very smart. What a lot of people don't know about her is she's super smart and has been for a long time. She knows her musicians. She knows her records. She knows her sounds. You know, she knows her writers and arrangers and all the people, you know. And so I think
because Anthony's a Swiftie.
I don't know, maybe,
so.
you know. Yeah, oh yeah. Well, I could tell that. I could see that.
Trust me, Anthony's a Swiftie because he's all about the back end that makes the front end. So
yeah. But I don't know. I think that's maybe how everything in her world comes to be, is that she picks it and she decides, you know, hey, you know, I want to try this, I want to try that.
Well, you played with Springsteen for a year. How did you end up with that gig?
Man, that was a wild story through a gentleman, Randy Jackson.
Randy Jackson,
who you guys know, you know,
bass player.
Another great bass player, man. Another legend.
That's right.
Of the 4-string and 5-string, and he I believe had played, as the story goes, I'll make it quick. He and Jeff Porcaro had played on Springsteen's album. Yes, the great Jeff Porcaro. Randy and Jeff had acted as rhythm section for Springsteen on a recent album that he had made. And I think the offer went to Randy first to do the tour, because I think after the album, you know, maybe there was a sense that this wasn't necessarily going to be an E Street tour. It was going to be Bruce doing something a little different, trying something a little different. And so I think he was reaching out to different musicians and things. And I'm pretty sure Randy and Jeff were the first two guys that got, you know, that got the call to go the tour. And then didn't, because, you know, obviously they're Randy and Jeff. Wow, which takes me to a very, very crazy night where one night we're on stage. One night we're on stage on that very tour, and Bruce just kind of brings everything just sort of spontaneously everything to a halt, and brings the audience to just a pin whisper. Nobody has any idea what's going on, but we know something has happened for him to do this in the middle of the show. And he just starts talking really, really softly and really deeply about this individual. And as he's talking, you know, I remember the drummer and I are kind of looking at each other, and pretty soon we pick up on the fact that it's a musician. We get the fact that it's a musician, okay, and this must be maybe a pretty famous musician for Bruce to take the time to stop his show and speak. And then little by little, it starts to become clear that the person he is just announcing to this audience and all of us has just recently passed away is Jeff.
Oh,
And so,
wow.
yeah.
Wow.
And so we're just like all just going, what, you know, yeah. And so it was during that tour that I was on with him, was the year that Jeff passed away. But Jeff and Randy had been the original musicians on that album. So I think they were asked to do the tour, and ultimately they declined. But in declining, I think Randy made a very Randy Jackson type of statement to these guys that I was perhaps at that moment one of his favorite bass players that he had been listening to on some very kind of more obscure records that I had played on, that he had gotten a hold of because he was a friend of the artist who had made these records.
Wow.
And yeah, talk about just
Fate.
random things and fate and all those things.
That's the bass universe, isn't it?
Yeah, no, not a lot of people would have heard these records, but Randy happened to be very good old friends with the gentleman that was the artist of the record I had played on, and so of everybody's hands that my bass playing falls into Randy's hands, and Randy goes on to tell Bruce's manager, "Hey, call this guy. He's my favorite bass player right now."
Wow.
And so that's how I wound up getting the call.
And so the moral of the story is you don't say no to Randy Jackson.
Don't say no to Randy ever.
Mhm.
I don't play live, and now I'm on tour.
No, never say no to Randy.
Yep.
Good
Now you
for
had a
you.
crazy amount of variety of projects, and this is very rare for a lot of musicians to have the gospel, the country, the country, although I say adult contemporary country, meet some of your rock stuff. Like, how is it that you were able to get the word out that you were available for all these genres?
I think it was just, just burying my head and just going, everywhere the day would take me, everywhere the call came from. There wasn't a call that I wouldn't take, in those days. There just, it just wasn't. And I played some very sort of high profile gigs, and at the same time, sometimes within the same month or the same week, I'd be playing on demo sessions or playing on country demo sessions or I just was always up for it, was always up for it, no matter the style, the genre, I was always up for it.
Wow.
And that just got around, but I genuinely loved the styles. I have to say that, that's what made me interested, is that, I didn't have this life where every day I turned up to work, it was just going to be the same, I was just going to be playing gospel music, all day, every day. Like I couldn't exist like that. And so for me, so much of the joy was in the fact that it might be a gospel record today, it might be a rock record tomorrow, it might be a hip hop record next week, or or it might be a country record, 2 days from now. I loved all these music. Folk music is some of my favorite music since I'm 8 years old, Wow. So as a means of studying these musics, I invariably would study what the musicians do to support the music. So a great folk bass player like a Klaus Vormann or these guys were geniuses to me in how they treated these singer songwriters material. Lee Sklar is another just a hero of the great singer songwriter records, right? Yep. That style of bass playing was as intriguing to me as anything Larry Graham ever did, as anything Stanley Clarke or Jocko ever did.
Wow.
I was just as drawn to the cats who played for Harry Chapin and Jim Croce records.
Yeah. How do they speak to you when you say we're just as drawn? Like, what in particular got your attention in that way, as far as the folk tone, as far as bass playing?
Just the sound of it.
There's a lot of pride.
It would have actually been a lot about tone, because that was one of the first things is that I noticed was their tone was decidedly different from an R&B guy or a gospel guy.
Sure, sure.
Their tone had this big round sort of, sort of feel to it with almost not a lot in the middle. Right?
Okay.
It's
Well,
just this,
I'm going to bring up a Jim Croce tune. I Got a Name.
Yeah.
And you listen to how the bass is leading from behind, how it's pronouncing the chord, but it's presenting these passing notes that are just it's so in the pocket that the pocket forms around it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. The bass is almost more important to that song than the drums are. In terms of carrying the rhythm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Another artist that I'm sure you've heard of, Alphonso Johnson, has a wide variety.
Oh, yeah.
And I was at a clinic and I asked him, how do you change for all these different styles? And I don't know if it was more of a live or a studio question, but the answer he gave was really on spot, on point. Was I look at it as if I'm an actor in a play. Yeah. And true. And because I go, how do you change style? And his answer was, I don't change style. The style
change characters.
That's it.
You change characters. You do.
Wow.
You have to put on that character.
Okay.
And you have to have studied, right? If you to play a character, you have to really have studied a character. And you have to buy into it if you think the audience is going to buy into it.
Awesome. Since we discussed working bass players and the working musician in general, have you ever been in a period where there was there's definitely the feast or famine with a lot of musicians? Was there ever a period that you wanted to say, something, this isn't working out for me?
I mean, I have to say I've been maybe one of the more lucky / blessed ones in this business as what I would call a journeyman, right? My context has been, sideman, and writer, producer, a lot of times within the context of doing that, I would sort of wear all these other hats, but as a musician, I've never really been band leader other than when I've been MD for, a house band.
Sure.
And so, I'm classic sideman, journeyman story to date anyway. And, I've carried that as such a badge of honor, I think, throughout, that, it has served me in staying busy, keeping busy.
Wow.
So I never really had the weird cycle of working, not working, working, not working, working, not working. Although I had lots of friends and associates that I've lived that experience through them in a way, but I was, from the time I landed here in 1986 or whatever it was, mid 1986, from that time I've worked, right up until, and that's a whole other story that we don't have to get into here, but right up until around 2013, where I really just intentionally made a kind of a conscious life adjustment, journey, turn, or whatever, where I removed myself from all activity musically. And it took about 2 or 3 years to do that, but gradually I just pulled out of all activity, touring, any kind of playing, any kind of writing, any kind of studio stuff, any kind of,
Now, was that because was you burned out? I mean, is it something that you say, I need a break from this business?
No, I had other stuff going on within my family with my kids and and my daughter in particular had become very ill, was becoming very ill, and we were in the early days of that and trying to sort out what was happening and to find the right specialists and find the right treatments, and we just got into this, cycle with that it was all consuming for a while. I mean, it still is in a lot of ways. It's a very large part of our lives.
Oh wow!
But it was new at the time, right? That was a new dynamic, and we hadn't had that dynamic before, so we were floundering and making a lot of mistakes in the early days of it. And once I realized that was the case, I realized I didn't. It wasn't fair to her. I just felt like I needed to focus as much attention as possible in those early days, for sure, those early years, at trying to sort it out.
Pray for you and your family and your daughter. And
thank you, man. I appreciate
all things turn. If I can ask though, did that create a pivot in terms of where you were recording as opposed to at home, which is going on all over the place, as opposed to going back into the studios? The difference for me is that I've kind of always recorded at home from the first time I was able to put my own studio together. This goes way back to probably the early 90s, 91. Wow.
1991.
Now that's a story.
Yeah. I always recorded really just kind of in. Now I was never living on these premises, except for a short period. I had one studio that I actually lived in for a short stint, but they were always houses, and there was always just a house that I chose, that I felt like music would be good here. It would be good making music here. And so we would literally build a studio in that space, sometimes only for 6 months to a year, but sometimes we'd be in a space for as much as, as I got more permanent places, we'd be there for a while. Like, I was 4 or 5 years here or 7, 8 years there. But it was by that time in my career, I was doing very little recording in an actual recording studio proper. I was really only doing all my recording at one of my places.
So all in all, you were able to sustain your career as a musician with the fact that you wore many hats. You were a multifaceted player. You were a songwriter, producer, bass player, guitar player, obviously with visual playing guitar. So that for you gives you lots of opportunities.
That was the saving grace.
That was your saving grace.
That was the saving grace.
The only reason why I brought that up, because I know a lot of, we've interviewed bass players, won't say their names, but a few of them would say sometimes you would be afraid of, like, you were just concerned when you can pay the rent.
Yeah.
That money would come in.
Oh, yeah.
But then you realize they were bass players for someone else. They weren't involved in songwriting.
Right. All these other elements. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And then Billy Sheehan once said, learn how to sing, learn how to write. And you realize how that became an important factor in being able to put together stuff, learning how to write, learning how to sing. And those are all such important things.
I was always, from the time I hit the ground here in Nashville, I was always, doing one of those things. It was either bass, or it was playing guitar, or it was playing keyboards, or actually, in those days, I was kind of the guy in the room putting a track together with a computer, basically, and all that stuff. And a lot of times, a ton of work for me came out of that function, because it very easily from there I would pivot to being the producer, because I was already managing, putting the track together. And at this point, in a lot of cases, the producer of the record was really just there functionally and administratively, but as far as the actual record being made, I was usually the guy in there making the record. And that just, certain artists would see that. I literally started having this happen, which could sometimes be awkward if the person you worked for wasn't really in your corner.
Mm-hmm.
I was lucky to have most of the producers I worked for really also very much support me as a young producer,
Mm-hmm.
because in some cases I was getting their I was getting their artists. Like, you know, sometimes I'd have work on something, and the next thing you know, I'd get a call from the artist going, "Hey, you know, we know our regular producer's really busy. We got this one more song or these two more songs. Is there any way you would be up for coming in and just helping us flesh them out and produce them?" You know,
Awesome.
and the next thing you know, I was sitting in the producer's seat.
Wow.
Nice.
Can I comment on that? I used to work with Jonathan Davis from Atlantic Star,
Oh yeah,
and he kind of became a mentor of mine. And the one thing he would say, he goes, if you're going to be an asshole in this business, you better be like, he goes, you better be talented, because you better be fucking talented like Prince.
yeah.
He's like, otherwise, he goes, they have to like you.
It's a short distance.
Yep. It's like they have to. You can be the best musician on the planet, the best producer on the planet.
Yeah,
If they don't like you, they'll use you the one time, and your phone will stop ringing.
and that'll be it.
Yep. So, well, no reason why I'm saying that, because you're an affable kind of guy. Look, when I first met you, and we spoke, how long? And when we were in the green room there for seconds, and you were like, "Yeah, sure." So I was like, I was thinking to myself, if I had a session, I'd hire this guy, because it wasn't as if you were like, "Well, screw you, you're beneath me."
Oh yeah, man. No, there's no room in that. There's no room in that, right? You can't find growth in that kind of attitude. You know?
No, not at all. No.
You know, there's no way for me to know who you are in that moment, right? And I'm sitting there talking to you, you know, and it's like, that's just thankfully a good mom, you know, who just taught you, you know, fundamentally impressed on you those things.
Yes,
you know,
absolutely.
always mind your manners, always be courteous to the people that you're, you know, coming into contact with. You never know who they are. She would always say that.
Yeah.
You never know who they are.
Well, it's funny how you say that, because my mother would say, "What goes up comes down," meaning that you don't know who's coming up the ranks, and you don't know who's going down. So when you meet people, like, I don't, you know, if I sit back and say something bad to you, and all of a sudden you become the president of Atlantic Records, and I'm there representing an artist, and you're like, "Oh yeah, you're Anthony Gathers." I don't remember you.
That's a tough spot, you know.
So awesome, man.
Yeah.
Greg, you have any final questions?
The producer that I'd met on a golf course, and the three guys that were running Universal Motown had joined a golf club. I'm in fact wearing the hat, and I ended up having, when you play golf with people, you have a 5-hour conversation, and the producer that I was playing with was Kadar Massenberg, who it's ironic how you meet people. And this is about 20 something years ago. It was before, it was just when iPods were coming out.
Gotcha.
And he had been producing India Ari, and he had been producing Erykah Badu, and he had been producing Brian McKnight. And we finished 18 holes of golf, and he asked me, like in my head, I want to be a bass player, you know. But I was a hardcore Mac guy at the time, and he says to me, he goes, what's the one thing that's going to change everything, do you think? And my answer was QuickTime. And QuickTime, you know, is the media handler, and it still is. And at the time I was, they actually had a degree and I was a virtual reality expert. But he looked at me and his head shook, because, you know, Apple changed the world, and Apple was going to change. Apple's changing the world right now. And this is before iPhones and smartphones. And he looked at me and he gave me one of these, and he's like, interesting. What's that? But that's where you meet producers. I met producers on the golf course. So, you know, and it was just, you know, you spend time with people, and they learn from you, you learn from them, and it goes on. And he had a very successful career with Universal and Motown. And, you know, that's aside from producing a couple things myself, he was somebody already in the driver's seat, positioning other people's careers, and he was a very, very nice person.
Yeah.
He didn't have to be, especially to me, and he was. So,
all right, let's not forget and also I feel bad because we're an hour and 8 minutes in. I've never asked you, what is your favorite bass? What do you enjoy playing?
Oh man, I'm still a Fender 4 man. I still love just a good jazz or a good.
Round of applause for Fender because Greg and I are Fender DNA guys.
Yeah.
Music Man, G&L, Fender,
G&L, Fender.
Yeah. I'm still.
We cover all three.
Yeah,
I cover all three.
Got my Tribute 2000 right here.
There you go.
My jazz bass in the corner. Oh yeah.
Although my new adventure is a where is it? I'm into 6-string.
Oh,
going all the way.
I'm
going all the way.
Nice.
Yeah,
nice.
it's well.
So is that one extra low, one extra high? Is that
both?
What that is? Yeah.
Both. Yep.
Both.
Yeah.
I've been 5 months into it, and the best advice was use the low B as a thumb rest.
Yeah, it's true. Noah said that actually, not just the low B, but Justin Raines, the gospel bass player, young kid.
Yeah.
He was talking about
serious player.
I was watching him on Scott's bass lessons recently. His playing is sick.
Oh yeah.
And he's so clean, but the one thing they kept commenting on was his funk to pluck. The volume doesn't change. The volume is even the entire time, which is very, very rare. There's no adjusting, plucking, and adjusting the volume. He plays, everything is nice and even the entire time.
Yeah. No,
he talks about that.
He's a master.
Oh,
yeah.
I
watch bass player.
Yes, he is, and he's young.
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah.
I don't know, 30s, 40s, maybe.
Yeah, young cat, man.
He's the generation of.
He's been at it a while though now.
Yeah, like him.
A while now.
I see these bass players like Derek Bennett, Sharia Reed, Justin Raines, all these gospel bass players that take these simple bass lines and they add all kinds of stuff in it.
Yeah, man.
And it doesn't sound busy. Like it sounds busy, yet it fits into the mold of the songs.
Yeah.
And I just watched that going, I wish I could do that.
You got to push vibe. There's a lot of things that stay sedentary in gospel music, and yet it's one of the Motown theories is that the bass never interferes with the vocal line, and when you go an uber low off the B and the E, and you're using that like a D and a G, you're really making the wave rock.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's nuts. All right, this is going to be our final.
This is the last question.
Yeah, so we need to talk about your Grammy, when you're winning the Grammy for Change the World. Even though we're a bass show, it is still a part of it because you are a songwriter. Tell us just give us the story of the journey of how you led to winning that Grammy, how it ended up in Clapton's hands, how it ended up in the studio, the producers, everything about it, and then getting that call saying that, by the way, we're being nominated.
Yeah, well, I'll let's see. The song started, I guess, two friends of mine were making an album, and two gentlemen, Gordon Kennedy and Wayne Kirkpatrick, two brilliant songwriters from our campus here in Nashville, that I spent a lot of my formative years here working with and making lots of music with. And so at this particular time, they had a band of their own that they'd formed and were putting together, and were putting music together for that band, as I recall. We did some recording sessions and cut some tunes for that band. And then I think we got down a good bit into that session, and they needed maybe some more material, or were looking for some more material. And I sat and played that riff for them, and that piece of music for them. And they went away and wrote the verses, came back with a couple of verses, and we recorded that song, just a demo version of it. I believe just Gordon and I actually were maybe the ones who did that. on the tail end of a session I was doing somewhere up in Ohio or something, as I
Oh, wow.
recall.
Okay.
And so we recorded this kind of little demo version of it, the two of us, and that made it into the hands of several different people. I think I know that Winona recorded a version of the song long before, or a little before. I shouldn't say long because it wasn't that long. It's maybe 6 or 7 months prior to Clapton recording it, maybe. And but she was found out she was expecting during the time of the making of that album, and so she decided to take the rest of the pregnancy time off and come back to the record afterwards. Well, during the time that she was off, the song, I had a publisher in LA, the name of Ronnie Vance, who was taking me and my songs around the LA area to all the different music supervisors. And one of those supervisors, a very nice lady named Kathy Nelson, who was the head of all the Disney-owned movie companies. She was the head of their music department. They had a movie they were working on. I think she landed on a DAT tape of songs of mine, and she picked this song.
DAT tape, whoa.
Well, yeah, that
Remember
says
the
enough.
old school DAT tapes, right?
Doesn't that say enough?
Yeah. So she was the one that sort of zeroed in on this song, and got a hold of my publisher Ronnie, and wanted to subsequently meet with me at some point, and so that all happened within weeks, I guess. And she told me her ideas about the song, and she had the idea that she would get Eric Clapton to record it, and she would get Babyface to produce it.
That's some idea, isn't it?
Yeah. These were all things these were all some
like
of the
you
first
just listening
things that
to
she
that.
said. Yeah. So I'm listening to the whole, spiel, and I'm thinking, because I had just signed my publishing deal with these guys, so I'm thinking, okay, this is what they do in Hollywood. They give you the hype early on,
right?
And it's I don't need to put a lot of weight in what's being said right here. I don't think I don't know if any of this will happen. I mean,
right.
And that's kind of really honestly how I left that meeting. Just feeling like that's very nice of her. It's very complimentary of her to say these things about my music, and throwing out these big names and stuff like that. I hope it happens. And
if there wasn't a secondary choice, maybe this, maybe that, she went right for it.
She said those two specific guys.
Yeah.
And she referenced a movie that she was in the middle of making, although she never said what movie that was at the time.
Right.
Okay. And but with those three things said, we wrapped up the movie, and I headed out, and didn't think that any of it would really translate to, I just thought, it would be really cool if all that actually happened. But
right. There could have been a secondary and a tertiary name and a third-rate producer. It could have been anybody. It wouldn't matter.
Yeah. So, within a couple of weeks, it was all happening. The sessions were being booked. I was being called. And all these people were involved. They were, the record was being made, and then the record got made, and then, everything that happened after that happened. But that was the beginning of it. And then, the record got made, and, it got earmarked for a single, to actually, put out as one of Eric's singles. And I mean,
right.
I think the public, had been in love with Eric Clapton for,
decades,
certainly a while since,
quite a while.
Particularly since he had lost his precious son, in that horrible situation.
Yeah, it was.
And so I think, the public was just there for Eric in general, and he put this record out, and they just embraced it, they embraced it. But I almost feel like he they may have embraced any record he put out, you know,
Sure.
in
But
that time.
I think when we spoke before the interview, he always pivots.
Yeah.
And,
How
but that
how
song's
long-
a pivot.
Yeah. How long? What was the process from songwriting to Grammy? How long was that? A year, 2 years, 3 years? You're publishing. I mean, what was the process?
Yeah, something like that. You know, I want to say this must have been around, you know, 95, 94, 95, 96, somewhere in there that we were first, you know, kind of tinkering around with the tune. And so yeah, by 96 it had been recorded by both Winona and Eric Clapton. And so yeah, so the Clapton version came out in 96, I believe. I believe that was the year it released. And then it was the next year that it was on the docket for Grammys and stuff. Yeah.
Okay. Wow, that's an incredible story.
Yeah.
All right, final question.
Yes.
This is literally the final question. What would you tell an aspiring musician, some young kid who's growing up there, he's trying to make a way for himself, especially from your perspective, because you're not coming in mono-focused. You're not coming in with just the idea of playing bass.
In a band,
Producer,
on
you're
stage.
you know, things at the table. You're on stage, you're at the sessions, you know, you have the publishing deal, so you're coming at it from all kinds of angles. What would you suggest to a young person who's coming up the ranks who's trying to do something similar?
Get really, 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 and this is the honest to goodness truth, because this is a lot of times this is the part that gets missed, I think, by just from the sheer excitement of like what technology can do now, and the relative ease that of being in music making mode, track making mode, beat making mode that you can be these days. I would say get really, 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 really good at whatever aspect of it you're most passionate about. So that starts to become troubling if you're me. Because me at 16, I couldn't pinpoint it down to one area that I was passionate about. I just knew that I wanted to be in music. And what I did know is that I wanted to make records. I did know that I wanted to make records more than I wanted to be on a stage playing live music. I was most interested in the record making process. So I wanted to learn everything there was to learn about the record making process, from the instruments themselves to all the technical gear, you know, all the buttons, all the lights, all the switches, all the tape machines. I wanted to learn all that stuff, you know, because I wanted to be able to do it without anybody's help if necessary, you know. And so what I would say is that the key for me in getting to do it was that I worked really, really super, super hard at learning all that stuff. Long sleepless nights, hours, days, weeks. You know, it was a regular thing for me to just be up for 4 days in a row in those days. It was just a regular thing, you know. Once I got locked onto something, I was obsessive about it, you know. Those early days of Mac computers and, you know, sequencing and all that, you know, programming, all the synth program, all that stuff was just, you know, that was just a world I lived in, and I didn't really come up for air a lot in those days. And so by the time I got in the business and got, you know, started getting job offers and stuff, you know, I had some wind beneath me in that I had studied these things really, really hard and really sort of at least got a working facility and a foundational place from which I could create very quickly, because I knew these tools and I knew this stuff really well, and that I think that helped. That helped every step of the way. That helped me get always that next job, that next gig, and it just kept propelling me to, different things. Being diversified was also another big part of it. So being able to not only play the instruments but record the instruments, was a big part of it for me. It was a lot of my work came from the fact that people did see me as a one-stop shop a lot.
Wow.
In those days. And I enjoyed that until I didn't enjoy it anymore. But in those early days, I really enjoyed the idea that I could go in and make a whole record by myself.
So that's cool. That's super cool. Get out of here. Awesome.
Don't know that everybody needs to do that, but the more you know,
the
better prepared you are. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Tommy Sims, Bassist Award winning.
Tommy Sims.
Thank you.
Bass player.
I was
Just
going to
all around nice guy.
say, you make the case for bass.
Definitely with the
Man. Thanks, gentlemen. I so appreciate you having me.
Yep.
Indeed.